Good morning, students. Today we are going to read chapter 1, The Open Window. Let us start with chapter reading. In next class, I will give you back exercise and question answers. And I will tell the summary of this story also. My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall said, a self possessed young lady of 15. In the meantime, you must try and put up with me. Frampton Nuttall endeavoured to say the correct something which should duly flatter the knees of the moment without unduly discounting. Discounting here means decrease the importance. The aunt that was to come. Privately, he doubted more than ever whether these formal visits on a succession of total strangers would do much towards helping the nerve cure which he was supposed to be undergoing. Do you know many of the people round here? Asked the niece when she judged that they had sufficient silent communion. Communion here means communication. Hardly a soul, said Frampton. My sister was staying here at the rectory. Rectory here means a house in the church. You know, some 4 years ago, and she gave me letters of introduction to some of the people here. This is the picture of the conversation between the niece and Mr. Frampton. Here are some difficult words that we went through in recent paragraphs. Let us move to next stanza. He made the last statement in a tone of distinct regret. Then you know practically nothing about my aunt, pursued the self possessed young lady. Only her name and address, admitted the caller. She was working whether Mrs. Sapleton was in the married. He was wondering whether Mrs. Sapleton was in the married or widowed state. An undefinable something about the room seemed to suggest masculine habitation. Masculine habitation means a place where men were living. Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago, said the child. That would be since your sister's time. You may wonder why we keep the window wide open on an October afternoon, said the niece, indicating a large French window that opened on to a lawn. It is quite warm for the time of the year, said Frampton. But has that window got anything to do with the tragedy? Out through that window 3 years ago, to a day, her husband and her two young brothers went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. In crossing the moor here means an open space which is kept for shooting, to their favorite snipe shooting ground, they were all three engulfed. Engulfed means caught in a treacherous piece of bog. Treacherous here means deceptive or misleading. It had been that dreadful wet summer, you know, and places that were safe in other years gave way suddenly without warning. Their bodies were never recovered. That was the dreadful part of it. Here the child's voice lost its self possessed note and became flatteringly human. Poor aunt always thinks that they will come back some day. They and the little brown spaniel that was lost with him, and walk in at that window just as they used to do. That is why the window is kept open every evening till it is quite dusk. Poor dear aunt, she was often told me how they went out. Her husband with his white waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her youngest brother, singing, Bertie, why do you bound? As he always did to tease her, because she said it got on her nerves. Do you know, sometimes on still quiet evenings like this, I almost get a creepy feeling that they will all walk in through that window. This is the picture of the conversation and the girl between the man and the girl, showing that the window is always open, as the aunt was waiting for her husband and brothers. She broke off with a little shudder. It was a relief to Frampton when the aunt bustled. Bustled here means came hurriedly into the room with a whirl of apologies for being late in making her appearance. Bustled here means hurriedly, jaldi se karna. I hope Vera has been amusing you, she said. She has been very interesting, said Frampton. I hope you don't mind the open window, said Mrs. Sapleton briskly. Briskly means quickly. My husband and brothers will be home directly from shooting, and they always come in this way. They have been out for snipe in the marshes today, so they will make a fine mess over my poor carpets. So like you, manfolk, isn't it? She rattled on. Rattled on here means talked on without giving any attention. She rattled on cheerfully about the shooting and the scarcity of birds and the prospects for the duck in the winter. To Frampton, it was all purely horrible. He made a desperate but only partial successful efforts to turn the talk on to a less ghastly topic. He was conscious that his hostess was giving him only a fragment of her attention, and her eyes were constantly straying past him on the open window and the lawn beyond. It was certainly an unfortunate coincidence that he should have paid his visit on this tragic anniversary. The doctors agree in ordering me complete rest, an absence of mental excitement, and avoidance of anything in the nature of violent physical exercise, announced Frampton. He labored under the tolerably widespread delusion that total strangers and chance acquaintances are hungry for the least detail of one's ailments and infirmities, their cause and cure. On the matter of diet, they are not so much in the agreement, he continued. No, said Mrs. Sapleton in a voice which only replaced a yawn at the last moment. Then she suddenly brightened into alert attention, but not to what Frampton was saying. Here they are at last, she cried, just in time for tea, and don't they look as if they were muddy up to the eyes? Frampton shivered slightly and turned towards the niece with a look intended to convey sympathetic comprehension. The child was staring out through the open window with a dazed horror in her eyes. In a chill shock of nameless fear, Frampton swung round in his seat and looked in the same direction. In the deepening twilight, three figures were walking across the lawn towards the window. They all carried guns under their arms, and one of them was additionally burdened with a white coat hung over his shoulder. A tired brown spaniel kept close at their heels. Noiselessly they neared the house, and then a hoarse young voice chanted out of the dusk. I said, Bertie, why do you bound? Frampton grabbed wildly at his stick and hat. The hall door, the gravel drive, and the front gate were dimly noted stages in his headlong retreat. A cyclist coming along the road had to run into the hedge to avoid imminent collision. Here we are, my dear, said the bearer of the white Macintosh. Macintosh here means full length of waterproof coat. coming in through the window, fairly muddy but most of it dry. Who was that who bolted out as we came up? An most extraordinary man, Mr. Nuttall, said Mrs. Sapleton. Could only talk about his illness and dashed off without a word of goodbye or apology when you arrived. One would think he had seen a ghost. I expect it was the spaniel, said the niece calmly. He told me he had a horror of dogs. He was once hunted into a cemetery, here means graveyard, somewhere on the banks of the Ganges by a pack of pariah dogs and had to spend the night into a newly dug grave with the creatures snarling and grinning and foaming just above him, enough to make anyone lose his nerve. Romance, a short notice, was her speciality.